Hey everyone, welcome to the NFL edition of the Daily Fantasy Flex podcast for September 28th, 2016, brought to you by FantasyLabs. I'm Matthew Freedman, the editor-in-chief, and I'm joined by returning regular Adam Levitan on Twitter at Adam Levitan. And also joining the show is the 4for4 super team of Chris Raybon and TJ Hernandez. You can follow them on Twitter at Chris Raybon and TJ Hernandez. Chris is the senior DFS editor at 4for4 and a coach at Roster Coach. TJ is the co-founder of Roster Coach and an associate editor at 4for4. Together, they host the DFS MVP podcast. Gentlemen, looking good as always. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Excited to talk to you guys, man.
Yeah, it's a nice little mashup of FantasyLabs and 4for4. How was week 3 for you guys?
It was solid. I could have reacted to some late breaking news better. I should have got Pryor into more lineups, but I did all right in cash. But I just wish I got Pryor into more lineups.
Yeah, I had a nice week. I got lucky and split my slates in cash because I was on some of the guys that were really bad, chalky plays, D'Angelo, the Chargers, but I was on guys like Shady, Devontae Parker, Aaron Rodgers, and GPP. So it actually ended up being one of my better weeks in recent memory.
Levitan, how about you?
Oh, yeah. No, I had a great week. I mean, this is 2 straight amazing weeks for me in a row, which is scary. I feel like, I'm going to press it this week and then, things tend to come around. So I don't know. I feel like last 2 weeks have been really straightforward for me, at least in terms of like what the chalk is and the chalk hitting, like we talked about Tannehill and Landry, I think, as far back as the Tuesday of last week. And then, like, they go out there and go off. Like, feels pretty good when that happens.
Yeah, you were especially on the ball last week. I had the worst week ever from a skill game proposition perspective. Blaine Gabbert and I seemingly owe 6 packs of Coors Light to everyone. But Levitan, you were 4-1 last week in our skill game props. You got that primarily by going against Gabbert at every opportunity. Your lone loss was the result of Theo Riddick failing to reach 15 DK points. Your big win was against Peter. You took Bortles and A-Rob against Rodgers and Cobb, so that worked out well for you. Max Steinberg, our guest, went 2 for 2. He managed to do better than the 1 for 3 Silva line. Peter went 3 for 4. He was undone primarily by proposing that Andrew Luck would be a top 4 quarterback. And then I went 1 and 4, which was absolutely horrible, primarily because I stupidly believed that the 49ers might attempt to come back by throwing the ball instead of running when down by more than 2 touchdowns. I don't know what I was thinking. Anyway, the upshot is that last week Adam was a middling 3-3. This week he's a robust 7-4, and the current master of the skill game prop universe. Adam, you have anything to say for yourself? Any particular sort of like bragging or shout outs you want to give?
Yeah, no, shout out to Jerry, extra treats for her. I'll be trading in all my beer. I'm not a big drinker. I'll be trading in all my beer for dog treats. And we'll keep rolling.
All right, let's get into the show. A quick reminder, we're going to focus primarily on roster construction and game theory. And then for all of our matchup analysis, you can go see our NFL dashboard on the site. It comes out every Thursday. It has previews of each game as well as positional breakdowns by this guy. Okay, let's do kind of first things first, and let's start with you, Chris. What are your potential chalk locks? So like the chalky guys you are fine with being in your cash game core.
Got quarterback Kirk Cousins playing the Browns. I think that defense is just lacking a lot of talent. Cousins is second in the NFL in passing yards. He has a lot of weapons. Jordan Reed, Jamison Crowder really emerging. Got the deep threat in Desean. So I really like Cousins in cash. Melvin Gordon, of course, against the Saints. They just really can't stop anybody. And Melvin Gordon's in the top 3 in carries, inside the 20, the 10, and the 5. I like Jordan Howard at his price tag. I know they just signed Joik Bell, but I think Jordan Howard will get a pretty decent workload. And at his price tag, I think it's worth it, even though the Bears are a slight underdog. They are playing at home. Wide receiver, Antonio Brown, of course. At home, I always love playing Antonio Brown. Since 2014, he's averaging 0.96 touchdowns per game at home. He's usually probably the most likely receiver to hit pay dirt at home anytime he's playing there. At tight end, if Antonio Gates misses another game, which it sounds like he will, Hunter Henry at essentially min price on FanDuel and maybe a couple hundred above min price on DK, I think is a solid bet at tight end. I usually like to save as much cash as possible at the tight end position because it's the most volatile skill position. If Henry is not going to get the start, then I'd go Zach Miller of the Bears against the Lions. They've given up 5 touchdowns to tight ends already. They led the league in that category last year. And at defense, I think the Texans on DK, they're a little cheaper there. The Titans just seem to bleed fantasy points to opposing defenses. They've been doing so this year. They've been doing so last year as well. And on FanDuel, the Redskins and the Patriots are a little cheaper than the Texans there. So those are who I'd go with on that site.
Sounds great. TJ, what are your thoughts? Who do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are going to be on the Chargers because they're facing the Saints. So I think we'll see a lot of Phillip Rivers. At running back, I do think people are going to pay up, and I'll be fine paying up for Le'Veon Bell. A lot of people are going to be excited that he's back. We know how much Pittsburgh likes to use their running back, use one running back. Le'Veon's going to play 90% of the snaps, probably see 85% of the running back touches, and they're in a really good spot against Kansas City. At wide receiver, especially on DraftKings, I've got to think that Terrelle Pryor is going to be in a huge amount of lineups. He's very, very cheap on DraftKings, averaging over 10 targets per game. Tight end, again, people do like to pay down, but if they pay up, I think it'll be for Jordan Reed, Chris mentioned Kirk Cousins. But I also think we'll see people go back to Fleener like we did in week 1, especially if Willie Snead is out. And then on defense, you have to like Arizona against a really bad Rams offense.
Yeah, I mean, these guys named pretty much all the chalk. I did my ownership projections initial run this afternoon. The only guy that they didn't mention that I have up there is Marvin Jones. I have in the 26 to 30% range. I'm not saying he's my favorite play, but I am saying that I think he will be highly owned. And I mean, I don't hate it. You know, this Bears defense has been poor to begin the year and decimated by injury throughout it. Lost 5 starters last week, had Kyle Fuller go on IR today. So, yeah, I think Marvin Jones will be pretty popular. And I do think people will go back to Travis Benjamin. I know he let some people down, but people just want to get a piece of the Saints, and you can't really blame them. So I think people will be on Travis Benjamin too.
You know, there is a pretty decent pricing discrepancy between Cousins and Rivers. Between those two guys, like, how do you kind of feel about them? Because, you know, if you're paying up or whether you're kind of staying in that middle tier, that impacts what you can do with the rest of your lineup. Do you guys have any strong feelings either way about how you want to go between those two?
I think the price is pretty close on DK, right? It's 65 and 69. Are you talking about FanDuel?
Yeah, on FanDuel, there's more of a discrepancy.
Okay. I mean, I prefer Cousins. You know, I think that you don't lose Keenan Allen and Danny Woodhead and Antonio Gates and just be like, oh, it's no big deal. You know what I mean? And I know Phil Rivers has done reasonably well in these scenarios in the past. I'm curious on your take. I mean, we can get to my love for Kirk Cousins later, but I'm curious on your take. Like, you wrote the article, I linked to it today on my Twitter, is the Superdome the Coors Field of NFL DFS? Do you think that applies when they go on the road? Because we've seen, you know, if Breeze doesn't play as well, it doesn't inflate the opponent's stats as much. You know what I'm saying? Exactly.
So what you see actually for almost any quarterback out there is that he's better at home than he is on the road. All of the opponents in general, playing any other team, they're better at home than they are on the road, except for the Saints. When a team plays the Saints, they're actually better in the Superdome even from like the plus minus salary based perspective. They are better in the Superdome than they are at home. And I think that has to do basically just with Drew Brees' dramatic outperformance at home. And then, of course, it definitely helps that you have the Saints, like an all-time horrible defense that just hemorrhage points. And so that sort of breeds this type of high-scoring, fast-paced back-and-forth game. So I think those games on the road are a little bit different. They're not your typical kind of high-scoring Saints games. And I think we saw that in week 2 with a big sort of disappointment in that Saints-Giants game. So I don't think it has to be the same type of game that we normally think of when we think of a Saints game. But I definitely, I mean, I'm with you on Cousins. Cousins, I think, is definitely really an intriguing play there. TJ, Chris, any thoughts?
I think I like Cousins more too because I think just because of the Saints defense, I think Rivers will probably be the highest owned cash game quarterback either way, even on FanDuel where they did give him a price hike. I could be wrong, but I think that's what's going to be the case. And anytime you can just get a little bit of extra leverage by maybe getting that second or third highest owned QB who you feel is in a similar spot, I think it's a good way to go. And like I said, Cousins has been putting up numbers. He's got the weapons to do it. And I think Adam made a great point. Rivers has lost a lot of weapons. I think they would kind of prefer to just run the ball as much as they possibly could. I mean, look at what the Saints gave up on the ground. We know Ken Wisenhunt back over there in 2013 when he was with the Chargers, they played a lot of keep away. I think the Saints are a team that you would, even though they struggle on the road, you still would like to keep the ball out of Drew Brees' hands. Don't let Brandon Cooks beat you. Now Coby Fleener's coming on. So I really think the Chargers would prefer to run the ball. I'd rather have Melvin Gordon in my cash games than Phillip Rivers.
Yeah, I think that makes sense here. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the chalky fades and some of the leverage and pivot plays that you want to use instead of those guys. So TJ, let's start with you. Who are you looking to fade out of the guys that you think are going to be really popular, and then who do you like instead?
Yeah, I mean, the guy that stands out to me, I'm looking at DraftKings pricing, and I'm just kind of looking at natural price pivots here. Chris mentioned that San Diego's going to want to run given the chance. I think that even if Rivers ends up having a really good game, Melvin Gordon could end up scoring those touchdowns. So if we look at just $100 less, I'm actually looking at FanDuel pricing here. Roethlisberger's only $100 less than Phillip Rivers, and I think that's a spot against the Chiefs, as I mentioned with Le'Veon Bell, where Pittsburgh could really put up some really nice numbers. And then looking at running back on the same team, I mentioned that I think Le'Veon Bell will be chalk. I actually like David Johnson at a higher price point on FanDuel against a Rams defense that actually ranks, when adjusted for strength of schedule, actually ranks towards the bottom of the league in fantasy points allowed to running backs. And David Johnson already has 9 touches inside the 10-yard line. He's only converted 2 into touchdowns, but he's been really efficient if we go back to his rookie season. So I think that he has multi-touchdown upside this week and could be a nice pivot off Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Howard as kind of a guy who's just 25% scares me a little bit. And maybe it's my love for Raheem Mostert, who was just the absolute GOAT in the 2015 preseason. Like, this dude was unbelievable. So, I don't really make a habit of fading starting running backs who I project for 15 to 20 touches at 3,700. Like, I don't make a habit of that. But if the ownership is really going to be out of control, I think right now I have him at 21 to 25. If it's going to be higher than that, you can consider some stuff. I mean, Carlos Hyde is only 4,200. Dwayne Washington is only 3,800. Justin Forsett is 3,800. Matt Jones is 4,300. Like, those are certainly thinner plays than Jordan Howard on paper, but I think it's worth considering for tournaments.
Yeah, I think that Dwayne Washington play at $100 more than Jordan Howard could be really interesting. Theo Riddick struggled last week running the ball. Now, the whole team kind of struggled running the ball, but this Chicago defensive front is just getting decimated after we thought that was going to be a strength of the team. And Washington is a big guy. I think he can really do some damage there. And a really low-key, under-the-radar play that could work out in PPR, Fozzie Whitaker playing more snaps than Cameron Artis-Payne. They really like him down there. So I think that's another really interesting pivot.
Fozzie's interesting there, but you can definitely see it. He's a guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield. That always comes in handy. Dwayne Washington is really interesting. He's, I think, kind of a little version of like Kristen Michael in that, like a bigger guy, has athletic capabilities. Never really did all that much in college, but definitely had those periods where he flashed. I think if he just gets that opportunity there, he could really run away with that starting job.
Yeah. Oh, and one other guy I wanted to mention, Terrelle Pryor. I really have to see like what his ownership, what I think his ownership is going to be, because I think it's a really interesting situation where I think people, especially on DraftKings, on FanDuel, I think you can make a case to fade him just because he's priced up to $7K. But on DraftKings, he's still 4,300. Now, the first 2 weeks he got a bunch of targets and hardly caught any. This week he was a lot better. I mean, even though he passed and he got the rushing touchdown, he still got 8 for a $144 receiving. That was the bulk of his stat line. What will Washington do in coverage? Will he see a lot of Josh Norman? Will Washington be able to, now having seen a week of tape of this Browns offense and having the Browns going on the road for the second time after 2 straight demoralizing losses, will the Browns just kind of have a really big letdown game? And I could see Pryor just kind of having maybe he still probably has a decent floor because of all the positions he's going to play, but maybe he just puts up a very kind of average, like 13, 11 point game. And that would hurt a lot of people in tournaments. So I think I'm going to highly consider fading Terrelle Pryor this week.
Yeah, I was going to mention a guy that is actually a price pivot off of Pryor, and he's also a really nice leverage play on DraftKings, and that's Tyrell Williams at 4,400. I think if people are targeting that game, it's going to be Rivers, it's going to be Benjamin because he had the big game a couple weeks ago, and obviously Gordon. But Williams is the guy that's been their red zone target. Only 4 wide receivers have more red zone targets than Williams, so that's really where that touchdown upside comes from. I know Benjamin gets those splash highlight plays, but those are very hard to predict, whereas those red zone targets are going to turn into touchdowns much more frequently. So I think doubling as a price pivot and a leverage play is a fantastic GPP option.
Here's one random question. Not that anyone is realistically thinking about playing Cody Kessler this week, but kind of he's been, I think, named the starter moving forward, and he actually didn't, I think, embarrass himself all that much in his first NFL start. As the season progresses and we see Josh Gordon come back, eventually Corey Coleman might come back, do we think that Kessler has the potential to be a guy that can at least support some of those weapons, at least in maybe good opportunities, good spots?
Yeah, I'd like to see it again, to be honest with you. I mean, like I said last week, I don't know too much about him. I thought he played reasonably well last week, but as one game, we'll see as teams get more tape on him, and we'll see a defense more competent than the Dolphins, although I'm not sure the Redskins are too much more competent than the Dolphins. But yeah, we'll see. But this weapon will certainly be there. I mean, Josh Gordon coming back is exciting.
I think Kessler is a guy that I'm probably going to roll out a stack of him and Pryor if I do go that way this week, and I'd probably roll out something with him and Gordon, because I think with these unproven quarterbacks, they're so cheap that I think there's a lot of leverage because they're going to be low owned and they're unknowns. So I think you have to use that to your advantage. I was actually a week early on Trevor Simeon. I actually was higher on him against the Colts 2 weeks ago than I was last week against the Bengals. I thought the Bengals were a better defense than that. But you just see, a guy like Trevor Simeon throws for 300-plus yards and 4 touchdowns because he has 2 receivers that can go down the field and make plays on the ball and score touchdowns. So I think Kessler is going to have that, especially when Josh Gordon comes back. And I think because he's such an unknown, most people will be off him. And he's going to have a game at some point. I thought he did play pretty solid just in terms of he can make throws, and he was reasonably accurate with the ball. I mean, I think he's still going to have some trouble in the pocket. He's probably going to have a couple sack fumbles here and there. But I actually like the idea of kind of rostering Kessler before he has that first big game that he'll inevitably have, just because Pryor and then Gordon, when he comes back, are such good deep threats.
Yeah, that's kind of where my head is on this. Let's talk a little bit about game selection. So it's really important. What are some of the GPPs that you have your eye on this week? Levitan, let's start with you.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to cash in the 3-3-3 on DK last week, so I'll try to run it back in there. I mean, that's one of the GPPs that has 10% rate. We know a lot of them have gone up to 15% at the $25 and under range. So 3-3-3 is obviously an awesome tournament. Our friend Mike Leone was in first for much of the day, lost it very late. I think he finished 5th or 6th, but that's definitely a cool tournament if you're into the bigger buying stuff. And I got to mention the slant. I can't go out. I can't go a show without mentioning my tournament, the slant. I'll be like sleeping at night, and then like I'll wake up and like I'll just make a lineup on my phone real quick, and like I won't even think about it again. I'll just fire into the slant. Just start firing just random thoughts into the slant. So hopefully one day it'll work out.
That's like your hot route. Like you'll just call an audible and you're in the slant. TJ, any tournaments, any games in particular that have caught your eye?
Yeah, Levitan stole mine, the slant. I mean, 30% of the entrants are being paid, only 5% is going to first. That's really good value. If you're playing really low stakes and just don't want a ton of risk, the double bubble is always nice just to throw some lineups in because it's kind of like a double up with upside. On FanDuel, I think if you're playing even relatively high stakes, the only really decent value is actually the Sunday Million. 25% of entries get paid out. But if you want to drop down a little bit, the $7 5 max I think is a really nice tournament. And then if you're playing the really low stakes, it's just there's two 200K snaps, but one has 20K going to first, one has 10K going to first. Well, 10K going to first is massively different, even though you see that 20K up top. 5% more of the field is getting paid out, with 10K going to first, and only 5% is going to first place. So if you're playing small stakes, that's probably the best value at those stakes.
I like that. Raybon.
DK, well, these guys stole a bunch of mine, but DK has the power sweep. It's a $150 entry with a 3-entry max. It's a 1,011 entrants, and about 27% get paid out. First place gets 10K, so that's a pretty decent tournament. I like the kind of cap on entries. If you're gonna kind of go up in stakes a little bit at some of these higher tournaments, it's good to get a little bit of a cap on those. And on FanDuel, there's a $50 tournament, the hot route. About 20% of entrants are paid out. It's a little flatter at the top than usual. 10K for first place, 7.5 for second, 5K for third. So that's a decent one that I'll be looking at as well.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to say about, and Chris kind of touched on it, if you're on a somewhat limited bankroll and you're trying to select which GPPs to play, even though you're not going to be able to roll out as many lineups and it might be slightly less worse value at first glance, I think there's something to be said for targeting those 3 max and 5 max fields, just because you're going to be on the same playing field as the Chris Raybons and the Adam Levitans. Like, there's no one rolling out 100 lineups, so definitely something to consider if you're scrolling through the lobbies. Don't be intrigued by those big first place prizes. That's something that's really important to know.
So I have a follow-up question on that. If you are entering those contests where it's a very limited number of entries, anywhere from like 3 to 10, how are you constructing your lineup, sort of like your portfolio of lineups, to try to give yourself, I think, like a decent chance at hitting first, but also a decent chance of kind of hitting in that sort of like monetizing sweet spot of the caching field?
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing, it depends on the field size. If you're playing those limited entries that are like $50 and above, you're probably only going to be facing a couple hundred opponents. So you can go, you don't need this super contrarian lineup. You can go with something with some upside, maybe just like a traditional stack with a quarterback and wide receiver that might be under-owned, but then you can really build a lineup around values. Whereas if you are playing these smaller stakes, one like a $2 single entry, the field's so big, if you're still going for first, you're still going to have to construct a lineup that is a little more GPP-ish, if you will, where you're still going to, if you're trying to beat 15,000 people, you're still going to need some pretty unique plays in there. So not always looking at the cap of the entries, but recognizing the field size as well.
Yeah, you also have to kind of realize that how these kind of tournaments are a little different from the GPPs just in terms of ownership. I think in the more higher stakes, lower entry caps, the value plays are actually a lot more higher owned. So sometimes I'll just fade maybe like one obvious value player, like one guy I think is going to be really high. And then like TJ said, just make a couple of your favorite quarterback receiver stacks, maybe, not the highest owned quarterback of the day, but just maybe the other 3 or 4 that are, going to be kind of in the middle of ownership. I don't think you have to in the big tournaments, you almost always need a player that's under 5%, or even 2 of those. And in these kind of mid-sized ones, I think you can kind of just focus, like TJ said, a little more on value, but just also being aware that some of the value players might actually be more chalky in these kind of tournaments.
Yeah, I think that makes sense here. Now, let's talk a little bit about the more conventional stacks that you would be looking to use in GPPs. So, Chris, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think TJ mentioned Ben Roethlisberger before, and I really like the idea of a Big Ben, Antonio Brown stack any week where I think as you guys talked about earlier, Le'Veon Bell will be highly owned. When Le'Veon Bell is highly owned, I think people tend to go away from Big Ben a little bit. Antonio Brown always seems to have high ownership, but anytime I can get Big Ben at kind of medium to low ownership, I like to take it. I do think I like a Cousins Jackson stack because I think that's when that can give Cousins the biggest upside in terms of yardage when Desean Jackson catches long plays, even though that's not usually the type of receiver I like to roster because he doesn't necessarily get the red zone targets against this Browns defense. I really like the idea. I think Cousins is going to do well anyway, but I think what would really put him over the top would be those long plays to Jackson. I think his other receivers are more short area guys like Reed, Crowder, and Garcon are more short area guys. So, Cousins could end up with, just a lot of attempts and decent yardage. But I think if he really hits it big, it'll be because of Desean Jackson.
Yeah. I don't know how conventional or contrarian this is. I'm not sure yet, but I think Carson to John Brown makes a lot of sense. And we know Michael Floyd is in the concussion protocol. We know that Carson had an atrocious game last week, but we kind of expected that. I think we talked about how it was such a good desperation spot for Buffalo with Arizona coming across the country, and now they get to go home and face the Rams. I mean, I don't know if people are going to jump back on Carson or not, but if they're not, I mean, I want to be back on Carson in this spot. And John Brown racked up a ton of targets last week. I mean, the dude is good. It's just a matter of time before he blows up, and he's the kind of player that I like to use in tournaments. So I think Carson, John Brown is a conventional one. And also Cam and Greg Olsen, expecting Desmond Trufant to be on Kelvin Benjamin. And I think that the best matchup for Cam is going to be Olsen. So, Cam, I don't really like using short road favorites in division games, but Cam is just the boss, man. I freaking love Cam. So, never have to think twice about using Cam and Olsen.
One quick thing there, just to follow up on the John Brown call. It's really interesting. There's a new metric that's been created by some of the guys at RotoViz, particularly a guy named Josh Hermsmeyer. It's called Air Yards. And so it's basically looking at something similar to Mike Clay's like average depth of target, and then looking at number of targets and looking at that from a market share perspective. So one thing that's really interesting is that John Brown has accounted for 14.75% of the team's market share just in terms of total targets, right? But he's actually accounted for 25.34% of the air yards. So even though he's done almost nothing for the first 2 games of the season, when he's out there, they are throwing him the ball deep. Yeah. So there definitely is the opportunity there. If he connects on a couple of those could be 2 long touchdowns, and that's definitely feasible. Like he has that upside. So I do like that call. It's a really intriguing call there.
I mean, he's only 4,300. You know what I mean? It's like if he catches one ball for 60 yards, it's like he almost already paid it off. So it's not like you're risking a lot.
Yeah. Sorry, TJ, go ahead.
No, I mean, going last on this podcast is really hard apparently because everyone steals your stuff. I was gonna say Cousins as well. I like pairing him up with any of those pass catchers. I'm really growing an affinity for Jamison Crowder. He leads all receivers in red zone targets now, so I think he or Jackson are fine. Cam Newton's always you might be able to do it in this spot, is roll out naked Cam lineup in a GPP just because he has that rushing upside. We haven't seen it that much. He has a couple rushing touchdowns, but he hasn't had that multi-rush touchdown game yet. So this could be a really good spot for that, I think.
Are there any of these games that you were thinking about stacking in particular where it just seems like there will be some great back and forth scoring action, or any of these teams where you're thinking that you definitely want to sort of just team stack, like get multiple guys in there, maybe even including a running back?
I haven't thought about that yet. I had one of my sleep lineups last week was a Green Bay Detroit game stack, but I didn't quite get there with the rest of my plays. So I don't know.
I think throwing out some kind of team stack against New Orleans is always going to be a good idea. I think a Rivers-Gordon stack could be really nice. I'm not opposed to game stacking the Pittsburgh game. Maclin was a guy that I was on last week because Kansas City's been throwing so much in the red zone, but that game just kind of went off the rails so much that nothing we really expected to happen. I think that could be one of the sneakier shootouts this week with a 48-point over-under. And with Casey throwing so much and obviously Pittsburgh always able to put up a big number, I think that could be an interesting one to game stack.
Yeah, if you game stack or if you play Cam and Kelvin or Cam and Olsen, like you could bring it back with Julio and maybe get Julio at like 5%. And I know he's banged up. He's certainly not 100%, but like he's going to be at home. We know about the inexperience in the Panthers secondary. It's like, Julio at 5% or 7 or whatever he's going to be as part of a game stack with Cam could certainly work at home.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think an interesting game is the Detroit Chicago game because you got Marvin Jones, and then you saw Hoyer throw for 302 touchdowns in garbage time last week. So I think you can go with kind of a Hoyer, Miller, Marvin Jones kind of little correlated stack and try to save some money on Stafford by pivoting to Hoyer. Or you could just go with a lot of different options in that passing game, Stafford, Jones, Zack, Miller, just kind of stacking the opposing passing options, especially because I think Jordan Howard, Theo Riddick, and maybe Dwayne Washington will all have high ownership as well. So you might, even though I think Jones will have high ownership, I think you can get just kind of get a little creative to kind of leverage some of those plays in that game.
Yeah, I like that. What about the Colts Jaguars game? It has a 49.5 over under.
Not on the main slate, bro. It's not.
Yeah. I mean, correct. But
do we look like CSC Ram 88 playing every slate out here?
Come on, we have some degenerates who listen to the show. We've got to feed them too.
I'm kidding. I've been playing every slate too. I'm only kidding. Yeah, no, go ahead. I think that game's certainly interesting. I don't know how how much data do we have on London games in terms of like how often they are high scoring, low scoring, etc.
You know what? That is a great question. I should run a trend on it and do an article for it tomorrow. I'm going to write a note on that.
Now we're talking.
I'm on the West Coast, so I don't watch those games, and I won't this week either.
If you don't watch it, it's not on your slate.
Nope.
Yeah. Okay, so let's table that game since evidently I'm talking to some non-degenerates here. Any other ideas for kind of like contrarian stacks or advanced stacks that you might be thinking about this week? Chris, let's start with you here.
I think you got. I really like those opposing passing game stacks. I think those are kind of the ones, like you saw it last week with the Rodgers to Nelson and then Marvin Jones. I think that worked out beautifully. I had that in a few spots. This week I mentioned I like the Roethlisberger Brown stack. Jeremy Maclin is a guy that, because of the way Kansas City runs their offense, they're a very scheme-based offense. Jeremy Maclin doesn't usually go off when he has a great matchup or necessarily do poorly just because he has a tough matchup. He usually does well when Kansas City gets down and has to score a lot of points. I know last year he had a couple of like 150-yard games when Kansas City was in catch-up mode. And I think that if you are going to stack Roethlisberger and Brown, or even if you're going to invest in Le'Veon Bell or some combination of those guys against a Kansas City defense that I do not think is as good as it has been. I know they picked off Ryan Fitzpatrick a lot, but I think that was more on Fitzpatrick. I think I'd like to include Maclin in my Steelers stacks. So that's a big one. And I think if you're talking about FanDuel, a lot of people don't know this, but kickers and defenses are very highly correlated, strongly correlated, almost at the level of a quarterback and his secondary receiver. So not a quarterback and his wide receiver 1, but a quarterback, wide receiver 2, quarterback and his tight end, etc. Kicker and defense stacks are just as correlated as those. So I really like the idea of leveraging some of the more popular defenses or kickers by just combining them into the same stack. So, for example, Washington, you can use the Washington D at 46 on FanDuel, and then Dustin Hopkins at 45 min price, and now you've got a little correlated stack there. So even though those two are probably going to be near the higher end in ownership, not as many people will probably stack them together as will just have them one or the other. So I like those kicker defense stacks on FanDuel a lot.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And as you mentioned, I think very few people will sort of go the distance of combining the defense with the kicker. I mean, some people will, but not everyone. I think it's a good way to get some differentiation in there. Levitan, you were going to say something.
I was just saying, why is Dustin Hopkins stone minimum? I mean, if you're going to have kickers, just do something. Like, Dustin Hopkins is the kicker for the team that is most inept at the red zone in the entire league. Dude had 19 points, 11 points of kicking, like 3, 4, 5 field goals a game, and he's mid-price at home in the nut spot. Like, anyways, had to get that off my chest. The contrarian stack that I'm on for sure is Brock and Will Fuller. I mean, I'm always on Brock and Will Fuller, and I don't know. I mean, people just want to kill Brock because he went up to New England on national television and played poorly. Like, he's 1 out of 1,000 guys to do that. He's going to be just fine. He's home against Tennessee, and obviously, like, Will Fuller is seeing almost the same amount, or maybe even more market share. I'm not sure, as DeAndre Hopkins. And yeah, I mean, DeAndre Hopkins, Lamar Miller, and Will Fuller, this whole team. So yeah, stacking Brock with any of those guys makes sense to me.
I like that. TJ, any thoughts there?
I mean, I like that call. I have one that is maybe even more off the rails than that. I think if you really want to go with a really low stack, you can do a 3-man stack with the Vikings, Bradford, Diggs, and Kyle Rudolph. I think that this is a spot where Bradford could hit that 300-yard bonus on DK against a Giants defense that has given up basically 300 yards passing per game. Greg Olson's the only tight end with more targets than Kyle Rudolph, and Rudolph has 4 red zone targets already. We already saw Diggs get loose at home 2 weeks ago, and I think he could have a kind of bounce back game after a down week last week.
Yeah, that's not the main slate either, you D-Gen, but that's okay.
And just to bring it back to Levitan, you're exactly right. Hopkins and Will Fuller have the exact same percentage, same market share of targets. Will Fuller, however, does have a massive benefit in that he's being targeted much further down the field. So if he does connect, he's obviously connecting for big plays. So that's one thing that he does have that Hopkins doesn't. And also, I mean, Kyle Rudolph, that guy is a substantial part of that offense now, especially with Adrian Peterson gone. So definitely something to keep an eye on. Okay, let's get to some bold real football calls and then one bold DFS call. And actually, I should say last week on the podcast, we had 5 for 6 in terms of our bold calls. We were incredibly it was like watching 3 oracles over there doing their work. So anyway, I will be interested to see what bold calls we have for this episode. Levitan, let's start with you.
All right, real football call. The San Francisco 49ers get the outright over the Dallas Cowboys. I think we see a chance for San Francisco to kind of rise up the way they rose up in week 1 on Monday night. And I mean, Blaine Gabbert is like, we know how I feel about Blaine Gabbert, just total dust. But maybe Colin Kaepernick gets in there this week. You know, it's like, I feel like we're on the verge of seeing Kaepernick in the starting lineup. I'm not sure it'll be this week, but maybe we'll see Kaepernick at some point in this game if Gabbert plays poorly. So yeah, I think that the San Francisco 49ers beat the Cowboys. And then for the DFS call, I'll stick with Will Fuller, 2 touchdowns, put it on the board.
2 touchdowns. Nice. Bold. Who was it? It was last week. You had Jordy Nelson for 2 touchdowns.
Uh-huh.
I think. That was very prescient, very nice.
Yeah, I think I said right in Darius Slay's mouth was my exact word, and that's exactly what he did.
Yeah, it was very nice. Chris, let's go with you. Some bold calls.
My real football call, I think the Buccaneers will hand the Broncos their first loss. I think Mike Evans' size will just be too much. I think he'll be on Talib a lot, but I think he'll also get matched up on Chris Harris a couple times, and I think it'll be like Kelvin Benjamin, where I think he can get a red zone score, and I think the Buccaneers will upset the Broncos in a low-scoring game. And for my DFS call, I guess I'm kind of going opposite of Levitan's real football call. I think Dak Prescott will be the top scoring DFS QB this week. I really like the way he was throwing the ball last Sunday night. I think the thing I like about this game is that I do think San Francisco will be competitive in this game, and I think that will actually help Prescott to be that top fantasy quarterback, because I think Dallas is going to have to throw, and just the play volume in this game is going to be more than Dallas is used to. And I think Dak will run for at least one touchdown, and he'll have his first multiple touchdown game throwing and end up leading all quarterbacks.
Number one overall, not even Peter Jennings would have the huevos to make that call. And speaking of, he couldn't be on the show because he knew you were going to pick against the Broncos. But actually, I'm interested. You mentioned Mike Evans there. He is, I would say like dangerously cheap on DraftKings this week. Do you have any ideas of where you are right now on him?
I think I wouldn't be opposed to playing him. The only thing with Evans that I usually am opposed to playing is a guy who's just coming off so many big games. But I think just the fact that he gets targeted so much. Like, for example, in the game against Arizona, we knew he was going against Patrick Peterson. We knew that was a horrible matchup for him, and it was a horrible matchup for him. I think he only got 70 yards on 17 targets, so that's like 4 or 5 yards a target. But the thing is, he got 17 targets. Vincent Jackson just doesn't get open anymore. You're just throwing him the ball because he's big. He hasn't produced. Cameron Brate, they're going to be on high alert for him after he scored a couple touchdowns. And I think Evans is the guy that I think he'll just get targets when they throw the ball. And as skilled as the Denver corners are, I think Evans is just a guy you can throw to when he's covered, and things can happen. And I think it'll be a low-scoring game, and I'm not opposed to rolling out Evans as a contrarian option, because it's one of those situations where when you can get a super talented wide receiver who gets a ton of targets and can easily score a touchdown, no matter what the matchup is, I think it's a situation where you have to at least look at it.
Yeah, especially when he's 6,500 on DraftKings. TJ, bold calls.
Well, first of all, I want to say if you guys are going 5 for 6 on your bold calls, I don't think you guys are being bold enough.
Maybe we're just that bold.
Well, no,
I'm not making any of the calls.
When I saw the 5 for 6, I feel like I had to reel in my boldness. No, I think for real football, I think Chicago gets off the schneid this week against a really bad Detroit pass defense. I think we see Brian Hoyer go back to just favor his really good wide receiver one. We've seen him do it in the past with Hopkins. We've seen him do it with Josh Gordon. So I think they just go nuts to Alshon this week. My bold DFS call, I think Mike Wallace is a top 5 wide receiver this week.
Wow, that's pretty up there, but very within the realm of possibility. And thinking of what is within the realm of possibility, I think it's time for us to make some skill game propositions. There were some good sort of like conjectural ideas thrown out there about what might happen with different players. So maybe some of those could feed into some skill game props. But Levitan, if you have any silver bullets in your gun, given that we are, wagering light 6-packs, right? Why don't you fire some of those?
Yeah, I'll take Raybon. I'll give him Dak will not be a top 5 quarterback this week if he wants it.
I'll take that.
Okay.
I would have gone at least to top 8, sucker.
I think he actually was QB8 on DraftKings, or no, QB8 on FanDuel this last week. So it's definitely within the realm of possibility. But Levitan, Dak will not be top 5. Any others, Levitan, that you are?
I forget which one of you guys said the thing about Fozzie, but like I'm like I get it. I get it with Fozzie, but it's like I never roster Jonathan Stewart for, like a lot of the reasons I would never roster Fozzie. It's like, he doesn't really he's going to lose so much red zone work to Cam and to Tolbert. He's going to share time with Artis Payne. I don't know. I mean, I don't hate it, but if whoever said that wants to throw out something, I'll be on the other side of Fozzie.
I think it was Raybon. Raybon was on Fozzie.
So wait, what's the process now? What do I have to do to?
Well, do you have you don't have to accept, but if you have an idea of what,
I'll give him under 10 DK points, and that's my final offer. This is a non-negotiable. Under 10 DK points on Fozzie.
Oh, I'll take that. He's getting over 10.
All right.
You guys are just bartering over there. Okay, so under 10 DK points, Levitan versus Raybon. Okay, Raybon, do you have any thoughts on skill game propositions that you might have?
Yeah, I'll go with Matt Forte over 20 DraftKings points against the Seahawks this week.
I'll take that.
Hang on 1 second. Yeah, I like that call though, man.
It's a good call. It's a sneaky call.
I have to take it, but it's a good call. Yeah.
I mean, we admire you for making that proposition, but we're going to take the other side of it.
Yeah, no, I think that Seattle on the road is a different beast, and we've seen, incredible usage out of Matt Forte from a market share perspective, and, pass catching running backs is certainly one way you can beat Seattle's defense. Instead of trying to throw to Decker and Marshall, it's like, hey, let's dump it to Forte and see what happens. So I like that call, but I'm still going under 20.
Yeah, definitely. TJ, any ones for you over there?
I got a few I like. For no one in particular. I'll just throw them out to the field and see if anybody wants to take them. I got the over on 2.5 touchdowns for Brian Hoyer. Anyone want to take the under?
Actually, I'm not going to be there with you if someone wants to take it, but I like that as the line, and I think that Hoyer is a really sneaky play this week. Not even really like that sneaky, like his people know, and he's min price on both sides, but I definitely like his potential this week. And if you're looking to go cheap, I think he's a guy that you go with if you're just absolutely fishing at the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, I mean 2.5 is a lot. I'll take. I don't mind the call either, but I'll take the action.
Okay. All right. TJ versus Levitan, 2.5. Got it.
2.5 is a lot.
I'll throw out a 4-for-4 co-host bet too as well.
What's up?
I'll go Crowder outscores Desean Jackson.
Oh, I'll take that.
Okay.
I just want to make sure. We're talking DK.
DK.
Yeah. Okay, Crowder over D Jackson. Just kind of stepping back a little bit. I think we all like Cousins quite a bit. And I talked with Peter Jennings before, and I know that Cousins is a guy that he likes. How would we feel about stacking both of those receivers with Cousins?
Yeah, I love that call. That's one I was going to bring up in if we got to it in the contrarian stack. It's like 3-man, sometimes even 4-man stacks could be really good ways to give yourself a really unique lineup, especially if you're playing really large fields. And I think that's one of those spots that you could do it, especially because they're just not going to run the ball, especially near the goal line. So you can have a spot where both of your guys get 2 touchdowns. You can easily have 6 touchdowns between Deshaun Crowder and then their quarterback Cousins. Like he can go 2-1 and one to the other very easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. Last call. Any other skill game propositions?
Not for me.
All right.
I got one more if anyone wants it.
Go for it.
Tyrell Williams outscores Travis Benjamin.
I mean, I have to take that.
Yeah, Levitan's just taking all of the action over here.
I mean, like it's I hear you. I like Tyrell a lot too, but I gotta take the. It's like, it might be like 52-48 on my favor, but that's how we make a living. You know what I mean? 52-48.
Yeah, that's an edge extrapolated. Okay, got it. Over Benjamin. Levitan's taking the other side of that. Okay, I think that is all that we have for this episode. Lots of good skill game propositions coming out there at the end. Guys, thanks for being on the show. We've been speaking with Chris Raybon, TJ Hernandez, and Adam Levitan on Twitter at Chris Raybon, TJ Hernandez, and Adam Levitan. 3 very original Twitter handles there, fellas. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt F. The Oracle. I'm Matthew Freedman, and this has been the Daily Fantasy Flex podcast for Week 4. If you like the show, please rate and review us on iTunes, Stitcher, or Podbean. Also, you can contact us via email, podcast@fantasylabs.com, and let us know what you think. And follow us on Twitter at FantasyLabsPods. Thanks for tuning in. Good luck, and we will see you next week.